You got me, because Midoriya isn't white, he's Japanese. But white anime fans who always like to point out how much they don't like how black fans change the race of the characters on screen never stop coding these Japanese anime characters as white, because to them, whiteness is default, it's automatic. So, explaining blackness is kind of hard. There's a lot of ways to really dig into the sense of cognitive dissonance that comes with living as a black person in America, living both as like your own sense of personal self, but also this persona that you're measured and weighed against at all times, where you can be a completely law-abiding citizen, yet be considered automatically unlawful just from your presence. It's sometimes hard to put into words, but often, like every once in a while, a concept or an event can really just like crystallize it perfectly and really get across the paradox that is blackness in just one moment. To me, my favorite thing that describes the mental headspace of being black comes from the movie Django Unchained. There was a lot of tension on the set, supposedly, because, well, it's a movie about slaves and it's gonna have a heavy feeling at times. But there's one story from the production that really sticks with me, because it's one of those stories that really crystallizes what blackness feels like in your head. Specifically, it illustrates the paradoxical nature of engaging with well-wishing white liberals and how, regardless of their intent, even on their best behavior, they can be kind of insufferable. So the story goes that one day on set, Leonardo DiCaprio is struggling with a scene. It's maybe the first scene, I'm not sure, where he has to use the N-word. And we're talking about the real N-word with the hard ER.
This was one of the most narcissistic, self-indulgent, racist, most despicable characters I've ever read in my entire life.
And bless his heart, DiCaprio is just not comfortable with performing. Now, mind you, Leonardo DiCaprio is one of the best actors of at least my generation. This is a man that has eaten raw fish on screen, did heroin, and this, I don't really know the appropriate words to call this, but I'm gonna just put it on screen.
Gilbert, that's them, huh? Gilbert, look, it's them!
I was reading it and I was like, there's no way I can pull this off. But I just tried to remain true to the character and not try to shy away from it, like deal with it head on and not like do things to cover it up. And I just tried to, make sure that it was real.
Make sure that it was real.
Yeah, he did that. Here he is, this Academy Award-winning actor dressed like one of his ancestors in front of all these black people. He knows how to do this, but when it comes to this N-word, he just can't find, So the story goes that Jamie Foxx, who Jamie's a good guy, comes to comfort him, explains to him that he's not supposed to feel comfortable in this character because he's human, he's a good human. And Jamie's a nice guy. Jamie has empathy. Jamie has all the characteristics that I try to champion on this channel. Despite the fact that Jamie's from a small town in Texas, and I'm sure had to deal with racism coming up from the bottom of Hollywood to becoming one of Hollywood's leading men, let alone leading black men. And he finds the empathy and the kindness within his heart to pull Leonardo DiCaprio aside and say, hey, we can get through this. You just have to subsume yourself in the role and we can make it. Really, we should all try to be more like Jamie Foxx, I guess. But Samuel Jackson, that's a real nigga.
But there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the usage of the N-word in this movie. And
No, nobody, none. The word would be...
Oh, I don't want to say it.
Why not?
I don't like to say it.
Have you ever said it?
No, sir.
Try it.
I don't like to say it.
Try it.
Really? Seriously?
We're not going to have this conversation unless you say it. You want to move on to another question?
Okay. Awesome. I don't want to say it.
Come on.
Will you say it?
No, fuck no. That's not the same thing.
Why do you want me to
They're
say it?
going to bleep it when you say it on your show. Say it.
I can't say it. If I say it, this question, it won't make air.
Okay, forget it.
Okay, I'll skip it. Sorry, guys. It was a good question.
No, it wasn't.
See, Samuel Jackson was like in his 60s, maybe even late 60s at the time, and he was too old for this shit. Sam, who also grew up in the South and went to Morehouse College, where he actually at one point in time participated in a protest that held Martin Luther King's father hostage. The same Morehouse College that Martin Luther King and Spike Lee and clearly channel favorite John David Washington attended. And he also had to deal with racism coming from the bottom of Hollywood to make it to be one of Hollywood's top leading figures. And he was even a Black Panther for a little while until his mother decided, look, I need to save your life, and bought him a ticket and sent him to LA to pursue acting in the first place. Samuel Jackson's a real nigga. He wasn't for the shits.
Buddy. God, whoops. And I said, what's the deal? He said, it's tough. I said, you know what? You're human. It's supposed to be tough. Samuel Jackson quickly said, hey, MF, get over that. It's just another Tuesday for us. And let's get going.
Sam saw Leo struggling, went over to him, pulled him aside and said, get over it, motherfucker. It's just Tuesday to the rest of us. That's cold, and I love it. I want to start there because to me, this story really illustrates a unique relationship that Blackness has to an emerging energy from white liberals. And when I say liberals, please don't get me into like the whole left to extra woke left infighting space. Like I don't ever want to enter that space. Just understand, as I talk about liberals, I'm not like, ooh, the liberals. Like I'm not doing that stuff with y'all. I'm sorry. When I'm talking about liberal here, because I don't want to make this a leftist discourse video, I'm just basically saying everybody that voted for Joe Biden going left. Like this is the line over there. Well-wishing white people, people that want to be allies, that want to do better and all that good stuff. And we appreciate that. It's nice. But we got to have a conversation. And I'm going to start that conversation, oddly enough, with Bo Burnham. And I think it's cool to start there because if there's any person that can perfectly symbolize the gap between white liberalism and Black people, or I guess maybe most people of color, it's Bo Burnham, because it doesn't get much wider than that.
We're reacting to Bo Burnham's country song, all right? And this is a joke on them. I don't know, somebody requested this, y'all know.
To help. Read a book or something, I don't know. Yes.
He like sang and did comedy. And I think he's a recording artist. You guys, I'm sorry, I have no idea who he is. I need to really do some more research.
Today we will be reacting to Welcome to the Internet, Bo Burnham.
Bo Burnham.
Okay.
First time.
All right.
Okay.
Black people don't know who Bo Burnham is, which isn't super surprising. Only churches and public schools are more segregated than the world of comedy, especially stand-up comedy. But it feels weirder that we don't rock with Bo Burnham because he's of the millennial generation where a lot of his work started out on YouTube, and he's been in, well, I don't know what the fuck he's been in because I don't watch Bo Burnham. I didn't know who this dude was. And I saw a couple of his clips on YouTube, and I know he's in a couple of movies. And I have to say, I feel like we're kind of missing out, y'all. Bo Burnham's kind of funny. He's maybe the closest thing that white people have to Donald Glover. That may be pushing it a little bit, but he's like in that same realm where it's it's comedy, but it's also a little bit of surrealism. And there's really a lot of clever and wit wrapped into his performances and what he does. And I'll get there in a second. Back to Donald Glover and also Issa Rae, who in my opinion are the two most like significant figures to get their start on YouTube. And like I've talked about this in other videos, Bo Burnham was also started on YouTube. He was only 15, 16 years old when he started releasing, comedy skit song videos from his bedroom. And the thing I bring this up for is because if you go back and you watch Awkward Black Girl or you watch Derek Comedy, some things don't age well, but for the most part, both of those products are still pretty good and relevant and like wouldn't get them canceled today. Bo Burnham's old shit though.
Now I don't know if all Boy Scouts are gays. They could probably tie the knot in like 50 different ways. Got a safe full of cherries cause I pop it and lock it. A girl's like a fridge, once a week you should stock it. Girl, if you're into rimming, it's only safe if you're swimming. And girl, don't sit on that couch cause I treat my objects like women. I spit fire like I just blew a demon. My shit's so hot, I'll leave your toilet bowl steaming. I'm gonna tear it like the cards of the gypsies. You'll bleed for so long you'll get monthly ellipses. If your pants are loose, I'll replete you. You're a first time vegan and it's nice to meet ya. I'm Bo Yo, I'm the greatest greatest rapper ever. And whether you think I'm clever or not, think you're better, you're not. Don't need a sweater, I'm hot. I'm a real G shorty that can really find your G-spot.
But this is exactly what makes his transformation to who he is now all the more interesting, especially to his main fan base that finds it relatable. Bo, like his white, mostly liberal audience, grew together through turbulent times. Bo would go on to do his fair share, from YouTube to doing like edgy humor. At a certain point, it seems like he started to really kind of grasp the nature of his comedy and not be okay with it. And his humor gradually became less edgy and a little more clever and reflective, and it almost became a parody of itself in a good way. Then in around 2015, at kind of the height of his rise, he stopped performing live. And he stopped performing live because he was having panic attacks on stage. And although he still did other work and made a movie in the time frame for 5 years, he did not appear live on stage. In 2020, he decided, okay, I've gotten the work done, I'm good, and I'm ready to get back on stage. But
and then the funniest thing happened.
And so now, stuck in his room like the rest of us during the beginning of the pandemic, he decided that he would create a Netflix special that he called Inside. And it's a mix of like a Beyonce visual album and a stand-up comedy special. It's all shot in one room, completely written, performed, recorded, produced, whatever, by Bo Burnham in that room by himself. And y'all, real talk, it's kind of amazing. Like really, really good. Now, I'm gonna let you know right now, if you haven't figured out from watching my videos, my taste is wild. I don't expect people to like the things I like. It is what it is. I'll say this. If you've ever laughed at one of my jokes in my videos on purpose, not just laughed at something stupid I did, but like the little, I think, clever things I throw in to make people laugh, if those have ever gotten to you, you'll probably like Inside. At the same time, if you watch it and you allow yourself to get emotionally invested in what's happening, it's actually deeply affecting. But that also brings up kind of my biggest problem, or at least curiosity about the work. See, emotionally investing in Inside wasn't all that easy for me. As I was watching it, some old weird feelings started to crop up. It was a feeling that I hadn't felt since I watched Hamilton. It's something about Inside that, while being amazing and thoroughly enjoyable, that is also for me a bit grating at the same time, because I recognize something about Inside, and to a greater extent Bo Burnham, that I knew but I didn't feel until I watched it, which is, as I mentioned earlier, that Bo Burnham, his comedy and his fandom is really, really white. And not just white, but liberal. And in that liberal space where I almost wish you weren't. And as I realized this, it became a little more tedious and annoying to watch it, but at the same time, incredibly more interesting. So flashback on me for a second. Who remembers the 90s? I'm an elder millennial at the very edge of having like been a Gen Xer. It's a weird space for those of us born in the 80s. That's a whole other video. I'm from an era where white people, and more importantly, white youth, had their own distinct popular culture that was fundamentally different from Black culture. Call me old, but as far as I can tell today, nothing about white youth culture is untouched by Black youth culture or Black culture in general. And on many levels, that's a bad thing. But the worst part of it, from my perspective, is that there were actually some cool things happening with white people by themselves apart from us. Like today, country music sounds like it's produced in Atlanta. The emo kids are all mumble rappers. Every young white pop star adopts their aesthetic from Black women. And although white images in TV and movies are still abundant, it's clear that many of them, for the sake of their white audience, feel the need to shoehorn in shallowly written Black characters as a way of deflecting criticism and tricking their fan base into thinking that what they're watching is kind of woke. And we'll get to that in a second. And don't get me started on like the TikTok dances, the slang, the fashion. See, back in my day, we had something we literally called white people music. And that was stuff like Blink-182. What I'm getting at here is that Inside has an ethos behind it that, while still understandable and appealing to anyone in America that suffered through 2020, the worldview it takes as its creative inspiration is explicitly tied to an understanding of the world that is very, very white and greatly liberal. And in a time where so much art and media is either Black or derivative of Blackness, it was almost jarring for me to see this. This type of art, this type of content is actually pretty prevalent, has been around for a while, but recently it's gotten more refined and developed and more consistent in its themes and influences. This is just the most recent in a pattern of white media that looks like this. So on top of Hamilton, stuff like Macklemore, Black Mirror, Lil Dicky, aka Dave the Show, Rick and Morty. Note that this media doesn't have to be categorically bad or even made by white people. It just has to give that same feeling of nihilistic modern white liberalism. So I made up a name for it. I call it white liberal performative art. And I just made this up, so cite me. Unless, of course, like somebody else already had this idea, then cite them. But if it's new, it's my shit. And so to me, white liberal performative art is any art form that evokes and presents a worldview that is intrinsically white, intrinsically liberal, and at some level is very self-aware of this fact. And it engages in and comments on that space, and in turn presents some deep philosophical questions that I'm gonna let somebody else talk about to see if this has legs, because right now I just want to prove this as a concept. To me, this framework boils down to three things. Number one is a white Habitus worldview, and 2 and 3 are an interaction between performative wokeness and existential dread. And if those sound like big, unnecessarily complicated graduate study words, trust me, it'll make sense in a second. White Habitus is a sociological concept that I've been wanting to talk about on this channel forever. It was first entered into discussion by sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva, and Bonilla Silva's whole argument about this can be explained in his book, Racism Without Races. Now, just breaking for a second, for white folks that are still here watching that are not offended, and hopefully you won't be, I'm not trying to offend anybody. Probably should have put that at the beginning, but anyway. If you are a white person that is actually interested in understanding racism from a more critical and fundamentally more effective way than the media tends to show us, I highly suggest this book. It is the best book for understanding racism for a person that does not experience it. The TLDR version of the concept is that white habitus is a fancy way of saying the social and psychological condition of whiteness, i.e. how white people see and experience the world. The basis for this is in the understanding that segregation is still very much alive and well in America. It's just not endorsed by laws. It's now enforced by banking and housing systems. Because of that, the majority of white people live in spaces with nothing but other white people. And the way American culture is set up, white people learn to understand the world as an intrinsically white thing. A byproduct of that is the natural construction of in-group, out-group dynamics among white people, especially white youth who are completely socialized in these communities. As these dynamics develop, they inevitably create racial hierarchies and sensibilities of what is good and what is bad, of what is normal and what is not. Now, you may be thinking, this should be true for pretty much any race in this country, let alone around the world. Don't black people think their cooking, dancing, and music is better because it's greatly entrenched in the traditions and culture of black people in America? And the answer to that is yes. This is the reality of pretty much every community across the world. People will naturally create and champion values and cultures that are native to them. But here's the thing, exactly what is white culture? Like, what country is white from? It's not Ireland, it's not Spain, it's not Germany, it's not Italy. See, all of those countries and the people from those countries, those are nationalities and ethnicities. And most of those at some point in time weren't even considered white in America. At some point they were subsumed under the understanding of being white. But when you start thinking about that more critically, you realize that the concept of being white only exists for one reason, and that's being anti-black. But let's say you like Jordan Peterson and you're able to disentangle the very racist history of the concept of whiteness from whatever white culture is today. Even if you're able to do that, right? The other big issue is, how does that culture being the dominant culture of this country change how racial hierarchies work across the board? Because the thing that a lot of white people don't intrinsically understand is that everybody else isn't white. I even have that problem sometimes. One commenter pointed out that when I was talking about white masculinity having opportunities to be more wholesome, that I used the example of Midoriya from My Hero Academia. And I was like, oh shit, you got me, because Midoriya isn't white, he's Japanese. But white anime fans who always like to point out how much they don't like how black fans change the race of the characters on screen never stop coding these Japanese anime characters as white, because to them, whiteness is default, it's automatic. Unconscious element of understanding the world as white informs so many other issues that are related to racism. Bo Burnham touches on this himself in the song Problematic. He speaks to the fact that his upbringing was overwhelmingly white. The song gets into how he developed his humor in isolation of understanding how his humor might affect other people from other cultures and other situations. And this may not have been a good thing. That never really occurred to him. And he feels sorry and embarrassed for his insensitive jokes. Now, I know I'm saying that kind of with a snide tone, but that's kind of where we start getting into that liberal space, because a lot of liberals, once they become aware of white habitus, they start to feel bad about it and they start to try to get the world from a different perspective. And no shade to you watching right now, because I know some of you are already typing in the comments something like, oh my God, I had no idea. And the realization that you're having is understandable. It's a core factor to what it means to be white and liberal or woke or whatever. And this experience is actually what leads to the second and third factors of white liberal performative art. So performative wokeness is basically when you start using liberation ideologies and theories as buzzwords and branding strategies. When you do like something good, but you can't do it and not post about it or take a picture to put it on Instagram. It becomes a way for white liberals, but also liberals in general, because I'm guilty of this too, to create distance between themselves and the problem that they are fundamentally a cause of, to signal that they are working to resist the systems of oppression and provide reprieve from the dread deep down inside that they're actually the cause of the very system they're trying to stop. An example of this is one of the absolute worst things that white liberals have done, at least in my lifetime, which is the whole safety pin pussy hat thing that happened in 2016. Oh my God.
The safety pin movement is a movement to promote love, tolerance, kindness, and safe spaces.
And I'm currently making safety pins for allies that I'm going to sell so we can all have something poignant and strong to show together in solidarity. Each pin.
So the pussy hat trend started among mostly white liberal women right after Donald Trump was elected. And the point of it was to be something good. Donald Trump's election shocked the world. It shocked a lot of us. And more significantly, it emboldened a lot of shitty people to be more shitty more openly. So people were getting attacked on the streets, definitely harassed online. Like, it was a bad time. So I get the idea that we're going to create a hat that shows solidarity. And we're going to create little cute safety pins. And the safety pin shows that we are allies and we are a safe place and we will defend and protect you if you are in a situation where you need us. But that solidarity was mostly for white women. And that safety pin was mostly virtue signaling. In isolation, the point behind these ideas were good, but it all ended up being just mostly nonsense. And so in the face of the real threat that the Trump administration posed to so many vulnerable populations, this felt like woke cosplay. It was just galling. It was probably exactly what Samuel L. Jackson was thinking when he was watching Leonardo DiCaprio struggle to say the N-word for his fucking job. And now we see corporations, pop stars, and pretty much anyone with a platform adopting some form of woke symbology in their products. And it's sometimes hard to tell what's just a cynical marketing strategy and what's real. So to Burnham's credit, he sees this trap and smartly kind of tries to avoid it in the first song, Healing the World with Comedy, where he questions his role in addressing these systemic issues and if it's supposed to be him, a straight white male, leading the way in the first place. He's also spoken on this in real life a few times, and to give him credit, like, I hope it's not coming across that I don't like Bo Burnham. I'm being critical here, but I love this special, and Bo Burnham, I fucks with him. He's on the right track. Jumping on camera real quick to provide, some addendum. When I was doing research for this video, I had found this clip that I thought was really good. It was a good look for Bo Burnham. Because as I'm editing this, I'm like, woo, your boy went a little hard. I went a little harder than I thought I did, but it is what it is. Anyway, this clip I thought was really good because he's doing an interview and he speaks on the fact that maybe for, white liberals, especially cishet white men like himself, who are intrinsically a part of the problem by default of inequality in this country, that they should be putting in more effort to step aside and listen and allow others to do the talking and thinking as it pertains to solving these problems. For the life of me, I cannot find that clip. I hope it's not a fever dream. I hope I'm not just making this shit up, but if you can find this clip, there was an important nugget of evidence that showed Bo's growth that reflected also within some of the work on Inside, specifically the song Killing the World with Comedy. And Yeah, I didn't want to leave that unengaged with just because I couldn't find the video. So that's it. That's it, y'all. It seemed like he kind of got a glimpse of how people were responding to this virtue signaling white savior stuff that was going on and really has been going on for the last 4 or 5 years, and sat back and said, maybe as a person who was able to make these crass and ugly jokes, I probably shouldn't be the first one opening my mouth to try to lead the way to help fix society. And then we get to existential dread, which to me is the most interesting and powerful element to this whole concept. Understand, I recognize that any decent human, upon discovering the type of daily injustice and horrifying acts of violence that befall people of color, immigrants, queer people, religious minorities, etc., that there's gonna be a sense of pain and sympathy for what these people are going through. The thing that makes this special, though, for white people, especially white liberals, because conservatives legit don't give a fuck. They think this is how the world's supposed to work, but whatever. These folks don't know the full depth and breadth of the problem. And getting them to understand that is difficult because of our first thing, white habitus. White habitus, at least in America or Western thought or whatever the appropriate philosophical designation is, teaches people, especially white people, that social problems are mostly the problem of individuals, that overall the system works and treats people fairly, and that it's individuals who make immoral decisions that hurt other people. And that's just not true. And it's really hard to make people understand that. So, getting dark for a second. Last summer when George Floyd was murdered, I'm gonna be blunt, I wasn't fazed. I was surprised even at the response, because to me, as awful as it was to see the image of George Floyd's neck being crushed by a police officer, it wasn't that much more horrifying than watching Eric Garner get choked out, or watching Tamir Rice being shot like a dog in the street, or watching a police officer flip out for no apparent reason and shooting Philando Castile while he was reaching for his wallet. And let alone Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered a week before by 2 white men, like hunted like an animal in the street. To me, it was the status quo. For me as a black man who looks like this, who for decades worked with high-risk youth, taught high school in high-risk areas, who has 2 black sons of his own, I just don't have the luxury of being horrified by shit like that. I have learned to compartmentalize so I can keep it pushing. And that's what I did. I figured it'd be the usual song and dance that happens when this happens and hits the news, because there's so many more incidents like this that never make the news. And so, yeah, I wasn't fazed initially. But for whatever reason, maybe it was because the video was so long and so indefensible, this seemed to really penetrate the consciousness of everybody in America, including white people that are overtly racist. And suddenly we had a much longer and showier trek back to the status quo. Instead of being a week, it was a few months. And that's maybe a bit unfair to the hard work that people put in last summer to try to move the needle. And I think the needle was moved. Like, I think that things that happened last summer did change the discourse somewhat and maybe will lead to significant changes going forward. But the problem is I kept seeing people talk about racism all wrong. I kept hearing white people say stuff like, we need to stop racism. Racism is evil. I hate to tell you this, and please understand me. Racism isn't evil, because evil isn't real, and racism very much is. See, when white people describe racism as being evil, they mythologize it. By calling racism evil, white people either knowingly or unknowingly create distance from themselves and the system of white supremacy that makes racism and all its permutations possible. In 2020, white Americans were really behind the idea of getting rid of all the racist people. But the real problem isn't racist people, it's a racist system. And as long as we have a racist system, there will always be racist people. And for many white liberals, learning this was a bit of a tough pill to swallow. And the one thing I'll give 2020 is that it really forced into people's heads, into the greater discourse, that white supremacy, not racist, was the issue. But once you start understanding and learning about white supremacy, a whole lot of other shit has to come into question. So white people everywhere started to realize, oh shit, I don't hate black people. I don't say the N-word. I don't seek to marginalize or harass Black people, but so much of how I was raised, so much of the world that I live in is explicitly tied to the subjugation of people of color. My lily white suburb centralizes economic wealth in one spot, which makes other communities and Black neighborhoods have subpar schools. My cool new bungalow that I bought in the developing inner city is now going to drive up property value and make it so that some 70-year-old Black grandmother is going to have to go live in a home because she can no longer afford her property taxes. My football team is full of poor Black boys from poverty-stricken communities that are sacrificing their bodies for the hope of wealth that will change not just their lives, but the lives of their families. But they won't even be able to appreciate it because by 45, they'll have debilitating either brain or physical injuries. My favorite chicken sandwich company funds conversion therapy. My iPhone is made by sweatshop workers. My favorite anime inspires pedophilia. My favorite TikToker steals content from lesser known Black creators, children, and never gives them credit. Everything is awful, and I didn't directly ask for any of it, yet it's all for my benefit, and to a great extent, there's nothing I can do about it. And then a scary, ugly question pops up. Do I even really want to, or do I just want to feel better? And that, my friends, is the existential dread, the paralysis of the knowledge of the horrors that work in the shadows for your favor and completely disrupts your concept of the meaning of your own life and purpose. And mind you, to show empathy, I feel similarly. I am, relatively speaking, a child of privilege compared to some of the boys I've worked with throughout my life, compared to some of my own family members. But the difference is, as a Black man, I've been building up a resistance to that existential dread since I was 7, 8 years old, because I needed it to survive, even with the privileges I have. But for white folks, for Bo Burnham and his fans, all of this wokeness, like literally you've been asleep and now you're awake and it's a hellscape and it's all happening at once. Some of you, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, some of you, maybe the last 6 to 8 months. So much of inside, the thing that makes it great in my mind is that it directly just dives into this existential crisis in all its rawness. It then has the balls to not give you a good answer. How can you be white and still be a good person when you've come to understand the depth of the problem, AKA that you're kind of the problem? The most blatant engagement with this is That's How the World Works, in which Bo plays himself, but then his friend Sako comes to help him drop a few woke bombs. And Sako says some real shit because he's a stand-in for the multitude of oppressed communities directly connected to yet subservient to Bo as a straight white male. And after Sako tries to explain all of these things and explain to Bo why him asking him all these questions is exhausting, he does some white people shit. But he also deals with this problem in the aforementioned Fixing the World with Comedy and then All Eyes on Me. And they are bookend because they both represent this journey that I think a lot of white people have went through. They start with casual and self-reflective optimism of how can we fix the world but do it properly. And then it ends in ego death and nihilism when you realize that the only way to fix the problem is to lose everything you've learned to appreciate in your lives. The existential dread of the work spans numerous topics, right? It encompasses more than systemic inequality. There's good stuff about just the way we treat social media and branding. But to me, that stuff, that's where inside really transcends itself. So yeah, white habitus, performative wokeness, and existential crisis. To me, those three concepts greatly describe what I see in inside, and they greatly describe what I see in so much art and music and TV that is geared toward liberal white America. I want to be clear that this is not categorically a bad thing. I think it's maybe the beginning of a good thing. And I say that because I do, sometimes to my detriment, sometimes in a way that brings me into conflict with some of my friends, I greatly empathize with what white people are going through right now in terms of this awakening to the reality of the world around them. And just because of my morbid curiosity, I am super interested in seeing how this will continue to affect their art and music and everything else, especially if it means getting art that is not just a less seasoned version of the stuff that I've been seeing and growing up with my whole life. And to me, inside is like the perfect distillation of all those things. Again, it's an amazing thing to watch. If you can stomach the intense white liberalism of it, which, I mean, like, fuck, we've watched worse, right? You should give it a try. It's having a profound effect on people for a reason. And I am just excited to see where that profundity goes, because to me, there's just so much more to this discourse that we haven't been having. To Bo Burnham's white audience, 2020, or maybe the last 5 or 6 years, was where they had to come to grips with the world as it really is. For me, at least, that's kind of interesting to watch and also to empathize with. Like, I'm gonna complain a lot about racism and shit like that, but fuck, I can't imagine growing up thinking the American dream was real without the added seasoning of irony and cynicism. I couldn't truly believe that bad things only happen to bad people, and that, you know, the things in life that you work for are what you get and deserve. I couldn't imagine having all that American exceptionalism be the way I truly understood and saw the world. To recognize the things that I did in my youth, or the things my parents or grandparents participated in, were greatly responsible for so much of the inequality that I'm seeking to fight against right now. Yeah, I get the existential crisis. I empathize. That shit is heavy. But sometimes I feel like Samuel Jackson. Motherfucker, to me, it's Tuesday.